All right, good morning. Thank you for joining us in what is the last of our webinar education sessions before we kick off the spring planting season. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the best natives for the residential landscape. My name is Jamie Heflin, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'm going to quickly run through a few housekeeping notes. This is a webinar, so your camera and microphone have been disabled. Questions can be typed into the Q&A box at any time. We'll either type an answer back to answer your question, or we will answer it live. And some questions may be held until the end of the webinar. Also, keep an eye out for some of the polls during this webinar, and we will also have a survey at the end. All of those will be anonymous. And a follow-up email will be sent out within about an hour after the presentation is over. This email will have a link to the required test for those of you looking to earn your continuing education credits. Please note the test should be completed within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel. And one more thing, I know there's a raise your hand feature, but we're actually not able to respond to that. So you want to go ahead and use the Q&A feature if you have a question. And with that, oh, and I'm sorry. Here is the, I didn't flip over to our next slide. This kind of just runs through what I just told you though. So those are our housekeeping notes. We are going to go ahead and get started with a poll. And this is just a quick poll asking what your experience level is with natives. So have you used them a lot in your plantings, a little bit here and there, or not really at all? Just a quick reminder also that Midwest Ground Covers is a wholesale nursery supplying landscape professionals. We are not open to the general public, nor do we sell directly to the public. We encourage retail customers to reach out directly to their local independent garden centers for assistance locating a particular plant. And I'm sure Nikki and Shannon will discuss the different types of natives we sell in more detail in their presentation, but I did want to point out this photo, which illustrates how our natural garden natives lineup of plants are packaged in a green branded pot along with a colored plant tag. All right, so it looks like, we got varying level of experience here, and most of you would say you're somewhat experienced. So there are those poll results showing you where we are here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and guess most of you are familiar with our presenters today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our Sales and Operations Manager, Nikki Moline, and Marketing Manager, Shannon McInerney.
All right, good morning, everybody. So we're going to get things kicked off here. So to begin, we want to talk a little bit about why it is good to use natives when we're planting in a landscape. Natives are a really important part of our local ecosystem, especially here in the Chicagoland area. So where we're located naturally, this was more, prairie back in the day, wetland. So this was really a critical environment where native plants kind of began their life. So why do we want to use them? They're very adapted to our local climate. So if you purchase natural garden natives from us, those are locally sourced within 90 miles of St. Charles, Illinois. So these plants are basically born and bred in Illinois in the Chicagoland area. So they have the attributes that allow them to be really durable and, will survive our climate, winters, hot summers, humidity, that kind of thing. With natives, usually they will reproduce on their own, so it's not necessary to replace them year after year. So they will kind of establish themselves and propagate themselves through varying methods such as seed or through rhizomes. So again, we'll talk and touch a little bit on some of these natives that might be a little bit slower to establish, but once they are established, really great plants for our local area. One of the really important things, if you guys have seen in the news lately on pollinators and kind of the decline in maybe bee populations and the importance of feeding monarchs and all that stuff that's gotten a lot of traction, native plants are excellent at feeding these species and help build their numbers back up. So again, really important to make sure you're integrating these into the landscape. There's great diversity. So if you ever take a look at what natives we carry, there's a ton of natives to choose from. So really there's a native plant available for any site that you're really looking to kind of plant up. And they are lower maintenance. So again, once established, a lot of these plants don't require excess watering, don't require fertilization. And actually through the presentation, we'll tell you sometimes that can actually be really bad for natives and help them not perform the best. So we'll go over what that means later, but they're very low maintenance and they can help for erosion control, stormwater management, help cleanse water. They're just really, really great plants for us to use and add a huge benefit to our local ecosystems in so many ways. So we're obviously huge fans of natives here at Midwest. We carry the Natural Garden Natives brand. And if you're really curious about all the different plants that we carry, make sure to go on our website and check out our native plant list. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide and Shannon will talk about the gardens.
All right, so good morning, everyone. So as Jamie said, we've had several webinars already. So many of you may have attended the webinar we had back in February with Austin Eichscheid and Jens Jensen talking about the work they did in the Midwest Native Gardens over at the Midwest Natural Garden site. So I'm just going to do a quick recap for those that maybe didn't attend that. So as I said, it was designed by Austin and Jens. It was installed last spring through summer, and everything there, or everything that was used in that design was native species. It was all primarily local ecotype, part of the Natural Garden Natives line. There are a few plants primarily in the shade garden area that we just don't have local ecotype source. So there are a few plants that were what we call a Midwest native or a Midwest ecotype, but almost everything is Natural Garden Native that was installed there. And so the goal of this garden was to showcase natives in a scalable way. So, Krista Oram Keller had the idea that, she wants to give people a representation of how they can use it in their landscape. Oftentimes we think of natives as kind of wild and messy and, something that like you're almost going to get in trouble with your village if you plant it in your yard. And so this was a way to use natives kind of in a more designed way, using aesthetics at the forefront to have all native combinations. So we have 3 different scales of design, from small scale to residential, so something that you would plant in your front yard, to what we called mid-size residential, which maybe is kind of along a back border, and then what we're calling the corporate campus, so a large scale native design. So in each of those settings, we have 2 to 3 different plant combinations. If you go on our website, we have the plant lists up there, and I believe it also has the percentages up there, so you can see how much of each plant was used. But again, this was to show that natives can be used just like any other, cultivated landscape plant to make a more formal landscape design. So that was our intention there, and we hope this presentation today gives you some more ideas and some more, more support on that.
Okay, so we'll jump into a few different residential landscape situations, and I do want to kind of reiterate that Shannon and I are not restoration ecologists, so we're not going to go over today how to restore a prairie or anything like that. So the intention today is give you guys some solutions for things you may be planting on in a more residential setting. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page there. So one of the things we get asked for most is pollinator garden plant lists. And so we wanted to jump in here and talk about some plants that are great for pollinators. And the way we'll have this kind of section of the presentation go is seasonally. So we'll have, early pollinators, mid-season when there's a lot of stuff blooming, and then late season. So we'll jump into the first plant here. And the first one we're going to talk about is Penstemon digitalis, which is foxglove beard tongue. So this plant is an excellent early season pollinator. Starts blooming May to June. If we have a warmer spring, it'll actually start blooming as early as April. This guy gets a little bit on the taller side, so about 2 feet tall if it's in ideal conditions. And it can take full sun, but also can take a little bit of part shade. So sometimes you will see this one on like a woodland edge or, you know, in a full kind of prairie situation naturally. This plant, the great thing about natives, I feel like, is because they're not cultivated varieties, they're not nativars, they're not bred for specific, you know, flower color, foliage color, you're going to see differences on these guys. So foliage color is going to range from like a deep green to even a little bit of a purple color. And flower color, we're going to see the same thing. Flower color can range from a white to even a light lavender or pink color. Height can range too. So again, with natives, especially if they're propagated from seed, you may see variation. So again, you might have one that's 18 inches, you might have one that's 2 feet. So that's kind of, I feel like, one of the fun things that you get with native plants. The other great thing about Penstemon is it is drought tolerant and salt tolerant. So if you have a situation like that, this guy can be helpful. And then it is also tolerant of clay soils. So if you have some poor compacted clay soils, Penstemon can help you with that kind of situation as well. Added bonus for this one as well, we have a rain garden section. This one can also be used in a rain garden. So you can see natives are extremely versatile. For this one, the early season pollinator, bees love this one. So when you're planting this one for early season pollinators, it's going to be bees, all types of bees, carpenter bees, bumblebees that are going to really love Penstemon digitalis. So yeah. Oh, one little thing to highlight with that one is it will seed about in your garden. So if you really don't want that, you can deadhead, but it will kind of seed about. So just want to warn you guys on that one.
All right, so next up we have Delia purpurea, or purple prairie clover. So you can see kind of has a cool purple, you know, seed head / flower. So something different, I would say, than a normal flower that you would, you know, find in the landscape. But obviously this is for pollinators as well. So this is a great midsummer pollinator plant in about July or August when it's blooming. So one great thing about this plant is that it is a legume, so it provides beneficial nitrogen, and fixing nitrogen is very important to prairie restoration to the soil. So a great benefit of having this plant in your yard. And this plant likes full sun, dry conditions. It has a thick and deep taproot. So that's really what allows it to hold up well when we get into some drought conditions. Size-wise, probably about 2 to 3 feet tall, I would say, maybe on the little bit lower end of that, and not nearly as wide. So this is a plant that's great for naturalizing, kind of dotting in through things. I would say it's a little harder probably to get it established as a mass. We did use this plant in the residential section, or the small scale residential section at the natural garden, as Nikki mentioned. We're going to have a short plants or more compact plants section as well, so dual purpose. But when we used it there, it was in a little bit higher percentages than the other plants in that area, just because I think you need a few more of them to make them impactful. So one important thing about them. And we're probably going to repeat ourselves again a lot on this today, but this will self-seed. So if you don't want it spreading too much, you would want to deadhead it. But again, you want the flowers there for the pollinators. So, so yes, the great plant for midsummer pollinators.
Shannon, on this one, do you have any comments on deer and rabbit resistance? That's a common theme we keep seeing.
Yes, I do have notes on some other plants, but on this one, I do not. I would think that rabbits would probably find this pretty delicious, but I can't say for sure. So.
All right. The next two plants we have for you are Liatris Pygnostakia and Liatris Spiccata. So we decided to highlight both because we couldn't pick because we love them equally. So they're actually pretty similar. So Liatris Spiccata is going to have a bit denser kind of flower bud count up the flower, where Liatris Pygnostakia is going to be probably the flower buds are a bit more open, but pretty similar. Liatris Pygnostakia can also get a bit taller. These two can also range quite a bit in height, though, depending on the soil composition and the just plant competition. So one of the things with native plants is they like a lot of competition. Naturally, that's kind of what they deal with, especially prairie plants. So if you have it planted kind of solo by itself in a very, very highly nutritious soil, these guys are probably going to get super tall and flop over. And that's what you're going to see with a lot of native plants. So if you have plants that you kind of plant in that old style garden where it's in a silo by itself and really organically rich soil, they're going to grow real tall and they're going to flop over. So make sure that you have a lot of competition for these, and they actually like crappier soil. So that's also, I think, a bonus for planting natives, is they don't have to be in a really organically rich soil. For these plants, they are great for butterflies. So butterflies love these in the late summer, and added bonus, birds love the seeds on both of these in the fall. So you're feeding the butterflies and the birds when you plant this one. Also great for rain gardens. So again, Shannon and I talked about, we're going to kind of give you guys added bonuses on these plants. It can be used in a rain garden as well as a pollinator garden. And I really think this plant's cool because it has multi-season interest. So when it's first emerging, it has really interesting kind of grassy foliage, I would say. And then the flower heads, flower stalks shoot up, have these beautiful flowers. You have some fall interest. And then in the winter, the flower heads will persist if you leave them up. So I really like that. I think it gives some really cool dimension to the garden over the winter. So kind of an added bonus. One thing to mention on this one is both of these plants do not like wet feet or wet roots in the winter. So they will take periods of wetness if they're in a rain garden situation, but do not plant them in a place where they will sit in water over the winter, because they are more susceptible to root rot. So want to keep them in a drier soil over the winter. So Liatris Pygnostakia and Liatris Spiccata. Oh, really quick on the rodent thing. So these guys spread by corms, which is like a real kind of thick root, basically. It's kind of almost like a tuber. So yeah, rodents are going to find that delicious. And we don't really have, I guess, a way to keep them out. With native plants, I feel like you have to be open to the fact that local flora and fauna are going to want to eat them. And that's just part of you're supporting the ecosystem. So I guess, yes, that is something they may find delicious.
Yeah, and on that note, I think too, just thinking about some things that are going to come up on this aster, that again, we're talking about this from a landscape perspective. So we also know that there are things that you are going to do in the landscape to maintain these plants that you wouldn't necessarily do if you're, if it was a full ecological restoration and it was intended for that purpose. So just want to put that out there as well. Okay, so next up we have Symphyotricum Levy and Symphyotricum novae, more commonly known as Asters. A few years ago we had quite a few name changes, and we'll talk about some more of those as we get more into the presentation. But yes, the Asters, or some of the Asters, were reclassified as Symphyotricum. So Levy is smooth blue aster. So that has kind of those nice light blue, dainty looking flowers. And of the two, this one is going to be able to handle a little bit drier soil, and it's also going to bloom a little bit later. So more like September, October. Whereas Aster novae, it's got that, slightly darker, more towards the purpley side flower. And it will bloom, in a little bit earlier, August and September. And this one can take a little bit more moist soil. It can tolerate clay as long as it's got decent drainage. So of the two, again, if you have drier soil, you'll want to use the Levy, and a little more garden-rich soil, the novae. But with both of these, it is good to give them several pinches or prune back up through mid-July to help the habit a little bit to help have them not be so leggy with the bushiness. It controls the height a little bit, because I would say 3 to 4 feet. That, I mean, it's definitely, I planted one of these, I would say it was close to 4 feet the first year, and was getting pretty floppy and opening up by the time that it was actually blooming. So doing that pinching will help maintain that habit a little bit. It will delay the flowering a little bit. But it, as it's noted above, these are a great plant for the pollinators in fall. So it's so important that as those monarchs are getting ready to make their way back to Mexico, that they have sources in the fall to kind of, take up the nutrients for their journey. So this is a really important pollinator plant to have something for them late in the season. So these are deer resistant. They are not rabbit resistant. However, that's not such a bad thing, because they kind of do the pruning for you in early spring. So I know I walked out before and been like, oh, they got them. I'm like, well, that's actually less for me to do in spring, and I don't have to worry about pinching. So if the rabbits eat these for you in early spring, don't worry about it. They're just doing a little bit of the maintenance for you. Again, as I think we're probably going to mention time and time again, these will self-seed. Or reseed. So if you want to control that, you can prune them back a little bit after they're done. Personally, I have Nove Angli in my yard, and I haven't seen it be too much of an issue, but just something to be aware of. So Symphyotricum Levy and Nove Angli.
All right. This is not the first time we've presented a Gentiana, and if you guys have seen me present about them, they are one of my favorites. I get really excited about them. So this one's Gentiana Andrewsia, and why am I excited about it? Well, this is a pretty rare plant. So if you're out, walking a prairie restoration area, or even, a remnant prairie, these are not very common items. And for us in production, it's very hard to grow these plants. So really exciting, we will have some this year. So we do not have them every year. Like I said, they're very hard to grow from seed. They're just take a long time to establish. So when we have them, I highly suggest, if you guys are interested in them, to grab them, because there's no guarantee that we will have them next year. So super rare, exciting plants. And I think one of the coolest things about this plant is the deep blue color on the flower. And it is one of the latest flowering native plants. So this guy's going to flower for you all the way into like frost, or even our first deep freeze. So really cool plant. It's called bottle gentian because the flowers on the plant actually never open. They stay closed like a bottle. And it is a main food source for bumblebees in the fall. So the bumblebees open the flower petals and climb inside, get the pollen, and climb out. So they're really the only pollinator of this one, because the plant was actually created just for bumblebees. So another reason why I really, really love it. It's fun to watch them do their thing in the fall. So this plant is best planted in a more like edge of a woodland. It likes some shade. With really hot and humid environments, it can maybe not do the best. So it would be best planted in a part shade location. This plant actually does also like a little bit more of acidic soil. So something to keep in mind if you have a situation that would work, but it will take our regular prairie soils that's native to this area. So, and we do generally have a bit more alkaline soil. So like I said, great for woodland edges, shrub borders, even maybe near a stream. It can take a little bit more moist soil. So yeah, it is slow growing. I have to say, like I said, it's hard for us to grow these guys from seed. It is slow growing when you plant it, but once it's established, it actually will form a very nice, robust clump for you. And you'll get to enjoy these just excellent blue flowers in the fall. So that's Gentiana Andrewsia. Really excited about that one. Make sure to grab some.
All right, so I think we have our first poll, right, Jamie? So let us know.
Shannon.
Yeah, that's no problem. So let us know which of the plants for pollinators, which you are most excited about.
Yeah, and there's a question on the gentian if it likes dry soil. It would rather be in, I think, a moist, well-drained soil. So like any native plant, I think they do become a bit more drought tolerant once they're established. But if you have a real bone dry area, I don't think would recommend gentian. So.
Just waiting on our poll results. All right, and yes, the favorite is Gentiana, which is, I mean, it is such a cool plant. There's really not much to compare it to. So
yep.
Very nice. All right, so the next category we have is natives for small spaces, so under 2 feet. So again, this is something that we tried to address with some of the combinations out at the Natural Garden. I'd say we weren't targeting quite that small in the designs out there, or what we call the small scale residential. But it is a very valid question that we get. You know, when people think of native plants, they're thinking of echinacea and asters, like we talked about, and a lot of the prairie grasses, which can get quite big. So if you're looking for something that's going to look, you know, size appropriate in front of a smaller house, these would be some great plants to check out. So first up, we have a Coreopsis Lancioleta. So this is, you know, what the origins of a lot of the Coreopsis that you would see cultivated in the trade. So same characteristics, really nice, bright yellow flowers. This is, you know, some of the more common ones in the trade are the threadleaf varieties, but this has the more lance-shaped foliage, like maybe Jethro Tull or something like that. So these plants are going to be really happy in full sun and soil that's on the drier side. So they pretty much like want sunshine, and they don't need a lot of moisture, and they'll be happy. So as Nikki said, this is another plant that would do well in poorer soils, rockier soils, things like that. It just wants some good drainage to it. This is also going to tolerate heat and humidity quite well, which is, you know, obviously great based on some of the summers that we can have here. So one thing on this is deadheading is going to promote some additional blooming. It will also help with some of the self-seeding that we keep talking about. So this one is definitely okay to shear back, you know, to promote another bloom. And also it can be cut back if it's kind of getting unkempt and straggly as we get through the summer. You know, a lot of things as we get into July and August can look a little tired. So this can be cut back and kind of get a little refresh to it. So one thing about these is they may need to be divided periodically. Sometimes they kind of tend to, you know, open up a little bit. So every 2 to 3 years, you might want to divide these just to give them a refresh as well. But from there, they kind of spread and colonize. So just, you know, a little maintenance every year, a couple of years to keep them looking fresh. So one other nice Coreopsis that we don't have on the slide here, but is Palmata. That one we actually did use at the Natural Garden, and that's going to kind of fit into the same mold size-wise. We're about 18 to 24 inches, so a couple different ones that you could check out. So this is Choreopsis Lancioleta.
Shannon, we have a question on cut back. Does it mean mow? I think cut back, it could be any method you want to cut back. If you want to mow,
yeah,
mow.
I would say in like for a mid, you know, mowing is fine, you know, in the initial cleanup in the spring. I would say if you're doing this in the middle of the season, probably more like a hand prune. Generally with most Coreopsis, if you kind of just like grab it like a ponytail and make a cut, that's going to clean it up for you pretty well. So.
Okay, the next one we have is Erigrastus Spectabilis, which is called purple lovegrass, the common name. I always think that's kind of fun. I personally fell in love with this grass way back when I was an intern at the Lurie Garden. It was my first experience with this grass, and it is absolutely spectacular in the late summer, early fall when it gets its seed heads. So this one is a warm season grass, so we're not going to see it emerge until we get some summer heat. And that's pretty common with a lot of native grasses. There are a handful of cool season grasses where you'll start to see growth, you know, right now as the temperatures warm up, like Calamagrostis, but majority of them are warm season grasses, meaning we do need some heat to start seeing these guys grow. So if you don't see it grow right away this time of year, don't worry. Again, it just needs some heat. So yes, like I said, the flower heads and the inflorescence kind of set in the late summer, fall, and kind of at that golden hour, if you get the lighting just right, these plants just look like they're glowing. It is absolutely incredible. A picture cannot capture how beautiful it is, really. You have to see it for yourself. So I really love this plant. Now I have to say, before it starts blooming, it looks a little bit like crabgrass. So that is kind of something you would have to deal with in planting it. But the inflorescence, the flowers are way worth it. And this plant is super valuable in a landscape setting too, because it's incredibly durable. It is drought tolerant. It is salt resistant. It likes poor infertile soil. So if you have a real rough site, these plants will probably survive. You find them a lot of times naturally on roadsides. So this plant can pretty much survive anywhere. Yeah, it does prefer to be in a bit of a drier soil. So, you know, it can survive in a gravel soil or sand soil if you have that kind of situation. Yeah, I think it's a very, very good underutilized, probably landscape plant. So that's Erigrastus Spectabilis. There's a question on deer and rabbit resistant. We have it planted quite a few places here on our St. Charles property, and we don't really see a lot of problems with it. So no, we don't see a lot of rabbit or deer issues.
All right, so next up we have probably one of my favorite natives, which is GM triflorum, or so I think most people know it by the common name prairie smoke, but when I was doing a little research yesterday, I didn't realize how many common names it has. It's also called the torchflower, long-plumed purple avens, lion's beard, or maybe most interesting, old man's whiskers, which you can kind of see from that plume right there. So just a very cool plant from that seed head that we're looking at there. But kind of to start at the beginning, these plants are, you know, the foliage is pretty well emerged right now. I went and checked on a couple plantings we have of it yesterday, and the foliage is up and it's starting to set the seed head. So it is ready to bloom. You can see there it blooms from June to April. April to June. And I would say that June end, it's more going to be that seed plume that you see there than the flower itself. But so the flower is actually very important for bumblebee queens. They are the primary pollinator of this plant. The ones that have overwintered, it's a great source for them. And so once they have they're similar to the gentian where, you know, they have to get in there. So once the bees have pollinated this, that's when you can see that nodding flower stem, it turns upward and then starts to form that you know, smoky looking seed head from what the common name implies. So then kind of that wispy look, that's what helps the seed to spread in a, you know, naturalizing situation where it can kind of catch the wind with that and disperse. So obviously, again, these are native plants, so they have these distributions built in interesting ways to help them survive. So this plant will do well in drier sites. It prefers well-drained sites. So again, as Nikki mentioned, I think with the Liatris, does not want to sit or be sited someplace where it's going to sit and be wet over the winter. It just won't be happy there. Full sun is its preferred, but in hot climates. So, I mean, we can get pretty warm in summer, obviously. A little bit of afternoon shade this plant will do okay in that as well. It will help it a little bit. So, yeah, again, like I said, one of my favorite natives, just has so many cool attributes to it. And it's exciting, you know, as things start to come up in spring, you know, it gives you something to look forward to. So GM triflorum. We had a question, how is the GM foliage on the attractive meter after flowering? I would say it holds up okay. It's kind of like this green cut leaf ferny looking foliage. So sometimes I think it will go dormant a little bit, but I actually planted some of these last year and they seem to hold up all right. And then they kind of get a burgundy coloration to them over in the fall and winter. So yeah, they hold up all right.
Okay, the next one we have is an aster, and you'll notice a super fun name there. So a few years ago, they decided to reclassify and rename all the asters, which was, I think, exciting for all of us. So this one's now called Ionactis Linarefulius, which is a fun Latin name to say, but it's called Flaxsleep Aster, or I found this one, again, it has a lot of common names, and this one was super fun, ankle aster, because it's so short. So I thought that's a fun way to remember that it's pretty much one of the shortest asters that you can, one of the shortest native asters you can get. So this one is more tolerant of shade. So a lot of asters prefer full sun, but this one will prefer a part shade environment. Actually, native, where it's found out in the wild, you can actually find it a lot in pine forests or forest edges. Also prefers a little bit, again, more on the acidic soil side. So, but will do fine here because it is native to the Midwest. And you can use it in drier situations as well. So it can be used in a rock garden or even a sand dune. I guess they find it native here in the more Chicagoland area. It will be found in sand dunes as well. So this one blooms very late. So again, September to October. It's a very important fall pollinator plant. Again, we keep saying that. I think when people plant pollinator gardens, they always focus on the summer. We need to make sure we're integrating things that flower late into the season, especially for monarchs, so they can make their trip back to Mexico. So this one's a great late season pollinator plant, and it's very short. So you can see it only gets 12 to 18 inches tall, 6 to 8 inches wide. And like I said, prefers full sun to part shade. What the original name was on the Ionactis, I am not 100% sure. We used to document that, but now we've kind of like just moved forward with the Latin names, but we can try and take a look here while we're doing the presentation and see if we can find it for you. But that's Ionactis Linarefulius.
I was trying to look at that quickly. I think it may just have been Aster Linarefulius, but yeah, we can try to look it up.
Yeah, it was the genus name that changed on most of the asters. So I guess that is something, if you're looking for asters in our product line, they're not found under aster anymore. So you can still do a search on our website and they'll pull up asters because it's in the common name. But yeah, there's no asters named Aster anymore.
Yeah, some of them are, I think, Liguniron. And some I think went to Solidago even. So yeah, they kind of ended up all over the place.
It was wild.
All right, so next up, we have another plant that I think more the varieties get a little bit confusing than the genus itself, but Rudbeckia Fulgita, and this is variety Speciosa. But or the common name of this one is showy black-eyed Susan. But in doing some research yesterday, this is very closely, very closely linked to the variety Sylvantii, which you may have seen as well. So they're going to be similar in height. Sylvantii is going to have a little bit bigger flowers, but not quite as numerous, whereas the Speciosa, the flowers are going to be a little bit smaller, about 1.5 to 2.5 inches across, but more numerous on the plant. So that seems to kind of be the distinction between the two. So then off of that, the most common cultivar you're probably familiar with is Gold Strum. And this was bred off, I found conflicting whether it was Speciosa or Sylvantii. So, but this was a Rudbeckia Fulgita too. So one issue with the Gold Strum that we hear a lot is disease in the landscape, the black spot. And so the great thing about these varieties is that they are going to be very disease resistant. So might not have quite as big a flower, but are going to hold up through the summer, especially when we get into the heat and humidity much better. If you deadhead these, this will promote a longer bloom time. So again, you know, a lot of people seem to go for the cultivars, but there's no reason that we can't just go back and be using the natives in the landscape. So Rudbeckia Fulgita variety speciosa.
We have another poll. So if you guys want to tell us which of your natives was your favorite for small spaces. Shannon and I really love seeing these results. It's always interesting what you guys are going to choose. Geum, yes.
Yes, such a cool plant.
It is. It's one of a kind, really. All right, so the next section we're going to talk about is shade gardens or woodland gardens, and you guys can see there a picture of our Carex classroom. So wanted to touch on the Carex classroom really quick. This is at our natural garden facility, which is a little bit off of our normal facility here in St. Charles. So that's where we grow all of our natural garden natives in pints and plugs. That nursery is neonic free, so we don't spray any neonicotinoids there. So, you know, make sure that those plants are great for pollinators. And we also have the gardens that Shannon talked about earlier in the presentation, as well as our Carex classroom. So in our Carex classroom, we have over 20 varieties, or about 20 varieties of Carex planted with other shade-loving natives. So if you guys have a chance, feel free to stop by. You can do self-guided tours during our business hours. Now, strangely enough, we do not have any Carex in this shade garden portion of the presentation. Reason being is Carex we could go crazy with. We have so many different varieties. So be on the lookout. We probably will do a Carex education kind of class or one of these seminars later in the season. So just be on the lookout for that. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Geranium Maculatum. And you guys might be a little bit more familiar with this one. I feel like it's maybe a little bit more of a common native, but great for shade. Will take a little bit of sun if you have that kind of situation, woodland edge, but does like full shade as well. So this one's one of the most early flowering natives that's not like a spring ephemeral. So you guys will see this one blooming April to June. It will seed kind of freely about the garden, but in my own personal experience with this guy, it does tend to form more colonies. So you can use it actually as a ground cover substitute in a woodland setting, and it will form a really nice dense mat and grows pretty quickly. So the other thing that I love about this, because again, I'm a huge proponent of multi-season interest, is it does have very rich, beautiful red fall color. So you get these beautiful flowers in the spring, really nice green foliage, and then we get that red fall color. So, and from our experience too, we do see some deer and rabbit resistance on this one. It does not repeat bloom, so just want to highlight that, you know, it's a native plant, so it's not bred for any of those characteristics. So you'll get a nice flower show for a couple months, and then those flowers go away. One note I want to make on this one is if we do have a very hot, dry summer, you might want to do a light shear on this one to help rejuvenate the foliage, because again, if it's really hot, really dry, you can see a bit of foliage decline. Foliage may start to turn yellow. Again, do a light shear, and hopefully that foliage will come back rejuvenated. So that's Geranium Maculatum, or wild geranium.
All right, so next up we have Mertensia virginica, or Virginia bluebells, which many of you are probably familiar with. I would say this is probably the most common woodland plant that you see, especially, I mean, if you're out in any natural areas, forest preserves, places like that in early spring in Illinois, it's kind of hard to miss the carpet of blue flowers that you'll see. It's just, when you get a mass of these, it is just so stunning. So you can see from the picture there, the buds kind of start a pink color, and as they open up to they get to that blue. But as Nikki talked about with the Penstemon, since this is, you know, from seed, or from, you know, from its own from its own devices, I guess. There can be some variation. So we've seen some here. We have a little spot kind of out in the UPick area that some of them were actually white, kind of turning to a pink, which is really cool. And someone's like, can we breed this? But we are not breeders here. We are growers. So unfortunately, we couldn't do anything with that. But be on the lookout, because you can see some cool variations. So this has the really nice kind of lush looking soft green foliage that's going to start emerging here in April and May. And then, like I said, these will just kind of be a carpet of those beautiful blue flowers. So these do, have seed to them, but they more commonly spread by rhizomes. And they are going to be happiest in a more moist, well-drained to moist site. So kind of, again, more damp woodland areas. They don't really want to dry out. And these aren't ephemeral. So as we get into the hotter, drier part of the summer, you will see these go dormant. So an important thing with these plants is to have companion plantings with them. So in this case, like ferns are great with these, that these are going to come up while the ferns are just starting to emerge. And then as these die back, the ferns will cover the space. So again, a really great woodland plant, kind of a staple in the shade, Mertensia virginica.
A couple quick questions. So do we sell plugs of Carex? We sell plugs of all of our natives. So if you guys are looking for availability, please just check out our website. We carry tons of natives. So Shannon and I unfortunately don't know that stuff off the top of our heads. Our website's an excellent resource for that. And then got a question on jumping worms. Also, Shannon and I are not experts on jumping worms. And that, I would say, is still something that is being researched heavily in our industry and in like the ecological industry. So we're not going to comment on that today because we don't have much to add to that conversation right now. We're growers, like Shannon said. So we try and stay up to date on that stuff, but do your own research. There's stuff coming out constantly on that topic. All right, so next plant we're going to talk about is Flox Devericata. And this is a woodland plant too, loves to be in full shade, I would say, on this one. And I want to highlight that a lot of these shade plants are different than prairie plants or native counterparts that love full sun. So these plants do like moist soils, and they do like highly organic soils. Reason being because they're native to woodlands. So they're used to that high organic matter from leaf litter and things like that decomposing in the soil. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about these woodland plants, because it is different. They do have different needs. So Flox Devericata has beautiful blue-purple flowers early in the spring. So this one will start as early as April, and they're highly fragrant. So I know we always really enjoy when it's flowering in our different landscape gardens, or even in production. You drive by the house we're growing it in, and it just like hits you. It smells incredible. So kind of a nice treat. Doesn't get overly tall, about 12 to 18 inches tall and wide. And can be drought tolerant, again, once established. So prefers moister soils overall, but once you have a nice established colony of it, can take a little bit of drought. Now, with this one, I will say with our hot, humid summers, the foliage can be a little bit susceptible to powdery mildew. Again, this is a native plant. It wasn't bred for mildew resistance, so that is something we have to deal with in some of these native plants. But if you do a light pruning or shearing on the foliage once the plant's done flowering, again, you can rejuvenate that foliage if that's really important to you. It also likes cooler roots, again, because it's a woodland plant. So if you have it in an area where maybe it's getting a little bit more sun, applying some leaf mulch is probably a good idea, because it likes to keep its roots cool.
Nikki, your sound went out.
So if you have it planted, rabbits are absolutely going to love it and want to munch on it. So that is a downfall of Flox Devericata. We can't help that some of these plants are just yummy, so a rabbit will eat it. But in general, deer actually don't love Flox. So the deer won't eat it, but the rabbits will. So that's Flox Devericata. All
right, so next up we have Erythema triphyllum, or Jack in the Pulpit. And so I have to admit, before I came to Midwest, I was kind of a flower snob, and that's what I always look for, or always looked for. And I have to say, you know, I've come to appreciate the natives and some of the cool attributes that they have beyond the flowers, you know, like I was talking about the geum, and this is definitely one of those plants. So you can see on the bottom there, the really just super interesting flower. Be warned that these do take some time to get established, so it can take up to 5 years for a plant to flower. But when they do start to flower, it just is well worth it for the cool looking flower. So you can see, again, these will have variations to them, but the outside is kind of a green to purplish color, and you can see that striping a little bit on the inside. So that inner piece, or that spike on the inside, is actually called the spadix, or the jack, and the outside is the spathe, or the pulpit. So very cool. So the spadix is typically has male flowers on it, but as they get older, they can produce female flowers on the bottom. And so that leads in summer to a really cool kind of cluster of red fruit, which is super interesting. So again, just some really neat attributes to it. It has that nice kind of palm tropical looking foliage, which is interesting too. So this is one that, with the exception of if it's producing that red fruit, these will go dormant too. So you want to have companion plants for these as well. So I saw there was a question about companion plants on the Mertensia. So like I mentioned, ferns are a great companion plant for both of these, but some other good ones would be asarum, or, you know, wild ginger. Geranium, Ictea would also be a good one, or like we have here, this is a photo from our Carex classroom. So these would be great underplanted with Carex as well. And then when these die back, you have the nice carpet of Carex there. And so these are going to bloom in April and May. And again, just, you know, you have to have a little patience with these, but a really cool plant for shade. So that is Erisema triphyllum.
All right, the next plant's a really cool one too, Uvularia grandiflora, or also called large flowered marybells. So fun common name as well. So this one's another woodland plant that likes to be in moist, well-drained soils with high organic matter. It's part of the lily family. And I would say this is a very underutilized native. So, you know, I think we get asked a lot for woodland garden, shade garden. Obviously, that's why we're talking about these things here. And this is one that I would recommend. Now, it flowers pretty early in the season, April to May, as do many of these woodland plants. Honestly, a lot of them flower early in the season, but you get these really cool kind of yellow bell flowers that do hang below the foliage. So you do kind of have to look for them a little bit more. They're a bit more inconspicuous, but you know, once you find them, they're really cool. They're a really nice treat. These do spread by rhizomes, and it is another plant that grows pretty slowly. I think a lot, again, with a lot of these woodland plants. So once it's established, will form a very nice colony for you, and bees love it. So it's one of the bees' favorite early season pollinators. So definitely one to try out if you haven't before, and that's called Uvularia grandiflora. All right, so we're going to do a quick poll here. We know we're running behind. We have one more section. Sorry, Shannon and I just love talking about plants, and we want to give you guys as much detail as possible, but we'll try and get done as close to 11 as we can. So which plant was your favorite in the shade woodland garden?
Interesting, pretty even.
Yeah, it is pretty even.
Lots of good choices there, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay, so last section, we are going to talk about rain gardens. So I'm guessing most of you are kind of familiar, but if not, just a quick description on rain gardens. So these are depressed areas that are meant to collect runoff after storms and kind of hold it and gradually let the water filter into the water table. So the intention of a rain garden is not that it's going to have standing water. The water really should be gone within 24 to 48 hours if they're done correctly. So they help with, again, like I said, filtration, and are a place for beneficial insects. They can, people might think that they would be a mosquito magnet, but they're not, because the intention is that the water is going to be gone and it's not going to be standing where mosquitoes can breed. And these plants are going to bring beneficial insects there that are going to eat the mosquitoes. So rain gardens need plants that can tolerate that influx of water so they can deal with being wet, but they also need to be able to handle long periods of dry. When we get into July and we don't have rain for a couple of weeks, they need to be able to handle that as well. So it's kind of a special breed of plants that can take those extremes. So our first plant is Esclepius and Carnada, and you guys probably were just waiting for the Esclepius. We couldn't give a native talk without talking about Esclepius, but we kind of wanted to work it in maybe the not as obvious section like the pollinators. So Esclepius and Carnada is a great plant for rain gardens. You can see the common name is swamp milkweed. So of all the Esclepius, this is one that's going to want to be in a little or can handle a little bit wetter area. So we have there that this is monarch larvae's first choice. They do like Syriaca as well too. So again, looking yesterday, there's kind of some mixed information on that, but this is definitely, one of monarch's top choices for the foliage for monarch caterpillars. And this plant is going to get 3 to 4 feet tall. It has that gradient of flowers, so they can be anywhere from pink to, a lighter pink to white color. They are very fast growing, so it might look like it didn't come back in spring, but just give it some time and the shoots will most likely start popping up. And the reason it does so well in these rain garden sites is because it has a deep taproot. So, the roots get down there and then it can tolerate the drier periods, even though it does prefer the more moist soil. So, like I said, that's our Asclepius for the presentation, Asclepius incarnata.
And bloom time on most Asclepius is the summer months, so it's kind of like, mid to end June, depending on the weather, and then they'll bloom, through July time period. So yeah, they're definitely a summer flower. All right, next plant is Hibiscus Mishudos, and this is a native hibiscus. So I always love this plant. I think it's so cool that we have a native that looks pretty tropical. So this one, you're going to see some variation on the flower color, can range from a white with that deep pink throat all the way to a lighter pink color. These flowers are pretty big. They're about 5 to 8 inches in diameter. And what's really cool is when this guy's in its full swing blooming, it can produce over 20 flowers a day. So loves to bloom, really nice flower color, and can add kind of a backdrop to the garden or even a back border or even kind of like a hedge. It's like kind of a woodier perennial, but definitely still categorized as a perennial. It will die back over the winter. This one will bloom for you guys in July to September, likes full sun conditions. And this one, like Shannon was alluding to at the rain garden, it can handle some periods of dry, but also likes some watering once in a while. So it is recommended, especially in a dry period, to give this guy a deep soaking, because it has those deep root systems, and because its leaves are so big too, it has more transpiration coming off those leaves. So it does need a bit more water, I would say, than some other native plants. And another kind of little bit of a downside to this one, Japanese beetles do find it delicious, but you can use, Japanese beetle management techniques to take care of that, but they will munch on the leaves like other plants. So that's Hibiscus Mishudos.
All right, so next up we have Euphatoryadelphus Maculatus, or spotted joe pye weed. So this is one like the aster that went through a name change a few years ago. So it was, originally known as Eupatorium. Again, also from doing research yesterday, I'm wondering if we should be renaming this to Eutrochium. It seems like that's what a lot of places call it. So, don't be surprised if you see a change in our catalog in the coming year. Sometimes it's hard for us to keep up with all the name changes, but by any means, So this is Joe Pye weed, which I think is what we all probably know it by. And so this is a great rain garden plant, again, because it can tolerate those wetter soils. It can tolerate more clay soils. It is going to get pretty tall, so 4 to 6 feet tall. Besides the pink flowers, it has a really nice kind of speckled purple stem. So that's what the spotted name, comes into play. And the flowers have a nice fragrance to them as well. So if you have, this rain garden, obviously you don't want it too close to your house, but someplace you're going to walk by, it can be a nice plant for that. So it does prefer full to part sun. It can tolerate that later afternoon shade in some places where it gets really hot. So yeah, just another great plant for rain garden. We're going to keep moving here. So this is Euphatoryadelphus Maculatum.
Okay, I think this is the second to last plant that we have. So we're going to end with a grass and a carex. So the grass we're going to talk about is Andropogon gerardii. So this is big blue stem, probably one of the more common prairie plants if you guys have seen it. This one gets pretty tall, about 6 to 8 feet tall. We'll get on the taller side if you have very fertile soils with not a lot of competition for this plant. So again, I've experienced it. When I was an intern at the Lurie Garden, they planted a lot of native plants on that rooftop garden. And when they planted that garden, they actually backfilled it with all this very organic soil. So when their natives started coming up and blooming, they all shot up and fell over because the soils were too rich and organic. So again, when you guys are planting native plants, make sure they have a lot of competition. I've been seeing comments come through on the chat about, seeding too much. If you have a lot of competition, a lot of these plants won't overtake the other. So that's the whole theory behind natives. That's why, ecological restoration is about having diversity. They will compete and you guys won't have one win over the other. So that's why you need that. So with Andropogon, it is a warm season grass. So again, it is going to take some heat to see it come up. So this time of year, do not fear if you do not see it growing yet, because it needs some heat. This plant, I love the seed heads. They kind of look like a turkey foot, which is kind of fun. So that's how you know what it is in the prairie. It'll be one of the tallest grasses. And then in the fall, get the turkey foot. And it is not recommended for small spaces because it is a little bit of a beast of a plant. So make sure it has space to do its thing, but gets beautiful fall color, orange, purple, kind of bluish, red fall color. So kind of a kaleidoscope, really nice plant. I think it's underutilized. If you have the space, check it out, Andropogon gerardii.
All right, so last plant of the day, we have Carex comosa. And this is commonly known as bristly sedge or bottle brush sedge. And you can kind of see why it gets that name. It's got that hanging bottle brush looking seed head. So this is going to be one of the taller carex at 24 to 36 inches tall. And again, there are many carex that can tolerate, shade and wetter conditions, or I should say wetter conditions, but this one does well in sunned part shade and more moist conditions. So that is a little different than some of them. So it has really nice, you can kind of see a little bit there, the lime green foliage, it's shiny, it's got a nice texture to it. And it's one of the more ornamental carex, so that's what makes it nice for use in rain gardens. So besides the use in rain gardens, the seed heads are good for birds. They like to eat the seeds, and there are certain birds that also like to build nests in stands of this. So a great plant for wildlife in general. So this is Carex comosa.
And I do want to comment that picture on the Andropogon was actually Schizachrium. I'm sorry about that. So that was the incorrect photo. We showed you guys a little blue stem instead of big blue stem. Looks really similar, easy to make a mistake. We should have caught that, but sorry about that. Wanted to own up to that. So please let us know what your favorite rain garden plant is. And while you guys are voting, I'm just going to do my little spiel at the end here. So this is our last talk for the spring. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope you have enjoyed these seminars. I know Shannon and I have really enjoyed talking plants with you guys. So our plan is to look at doing these maybe again later in the season once we get through spring. We all know it's the busy season. Hibiscus Mishudos, awesome, great plant. So stay on the lookout. We'll send out more information on education later. But in the meantime, if you want to stay up to date on what Shannon and I are doing in the garden, make sure to check out our Instagram. Make sure to follow us on Instagram so you can follow along on our garden walks, which will be happening every 2 weeks now that we're in season. And we do have plans to create, I think, 5 new videos this year. So be on the lookout for more of our Midwest Garden Pro series as well. So a reminder, you guys will get a survey as soon as we close out of this education series. So please tell us how we did, and please give us ideas for our next seminar series, potentially, later this year into the fall. And finally, CEUs, if you guys are interested, you'll get an email, take that test, and we'll get your CEUs over to ASLA. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Have an excellent rest of your Friday. We really enjoyed it, and have a great spring.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.